Welcome everybody. Great to see you, Amy Corbin, one
Amy.
of the production team, and looking good. Winnie Scherer, our distributor at Bullfrog Films, is here.
Thanks, Winnie.
Hey.
20 years, still going strong.
20 years? It's 20 years this year?
20 years any minute now, but soon.
What is time?
Miles McLeod, who was born during the production.
Yes.
Well, listen, everybody, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. This is really exciting for the filmmaking team. And what we've just done is we streamed the 4 Standing on Sacred Ground films as we all went into this COVID-19 shutdown. And we had great conversations with the indigenous people from the films. And as we went along, it just sort of occurred to me that it might be really fun to then do a prequel journey back in time, because Standing on Sacred Ground really grew out of the experience that we had with In the Light of Reverence. And it could not have been made without this incredible team of people collaborating so beautifully over that many, many years, 10 years. And so I'm going to introduce Melinda and Jessica and Will and Andy through a slideshow. But what I'd like to do, I want to keep up with Tantoo Cardinal joining us in a minute. Admit all, I guess, is what I should click.
Hi, Quinn.
It's great to see the gallery view with all you incredible people. Quinn, who edited a lot of Standing on Sacred Ground. Tantoo Cardinal, welcome.
Hey, Fiona.
Tantoo was the...
Hey, Miles.
I'm unmuting you, Tantoo, so we can hear your beautiful voice to say hi.
Hey.
Great to see you. And then Susie, I'm waiting a minute. I've got a little slideshow to show, and I'm going to wait a minute just because I know some other people are late in signing in, and I'm going to, when I go to the slideshow, I share my screen and I can't really see who's here, but there's Fiona, who was also our daughter, born during the production. And I'm going to flip back out of gallery view because I get distracted by all you incredible people here. So I'm going to do a little share screen here, thinking that the great way to introduce this film story and all of the great people who are involved is to just show a few slides and tell just me a couple of stories about the journey.
Great.
So we want to remember John Canoop, who was the cameraman that I worked with in the 1980s, who has since passed away. And with Andy in the 80s, John and I made many trips across the Mojave Desert where these petroglyphs are, going out to Hopi to continue a relationship that started for me back with the making of the Four Corners, a National Sacrifice area. And
Wow.
one of the most profound issues for us in the making of this film was that to show sacred places and their profound meaning for indigenous people, we needed to film ceremony. And the Hopi, amongst all Native people, are definitely the most closed, careful, wise about not allowing filming of ceremony. But we did learn that the further Hopi elders got away from the villages, the more comfortable they were doing something as simple as a prayer offering. And so Thomas Banyakia, and here my screen is refusing to go forward again.
The radio mics wouldn't work in Mesa Verde for some reason.
The technological problems that we had making this film were just
The electrical
so
energy field. Yeah.
That's
I
right.
think it was Andy, actually. I think it was the force that was.
It was a lack of knowledge, but actually I do think there was something weird going on there, and I don't know whether it was a Defense Department problem or a great spiritual force, but.
well, the Hopi elders were a little more comfortable doing something as elementary as a prayer offering at Chaco Canyon, so we were able to do some filming there. In the Light of Reverence tells 3 stories for those of you who've seen it: the Hopi, the Lakota here at Devil's Tower, and the Winnemem Wintu. The issue at Devil's Tower is rock climbers climbing a sacred site. the National Park Service, for those of you who have seen the film, Deb Liggett, the superintendent there, began a new procedure asking climbers not to climb during the month of June, put up some beautiful signs. It was a historic moment for the National Park Service. When we asked if we could film a pipe ceremony about an hour before it started, Elaine Quiver said that they'd never allowed filming, but in this one case, if it was nonprofit, educational, and that we really kept our promises, they would let us one time film so that they could show why Devil's Tower is so profoundly important to Lakota. So this is Elaine Quiver, who has since passed on with Oliver Red Cloud. And Andy and Will got right into the middle of this ceremony to film it as I stood sweating bullets on the edge of it. And they just went on ignoring us, and it was a profound moment. When it was over, Andy and I stood in the road, and a lightning storm came in, some related to the ceremony, no doubt. And we were able to get a shot of lightning hitting the top of Devil's Tower right after the ceremony.
Oh, you know, the story about that pipe ceremony quickly was that, you know, we were told that one night before that we wouldn't be able to film it. And then Will and Toby, I heard them rustling around outside the next morning at sunrise, and I don't know, probably you were out there 20 minutes or something, and then you're banging on my tent, get out of the tent, get out of the tent. You know, I literally like rolled out of my sleeping bag and into the pipe ceremony. I mean, it was remarkable.
Yeah, watching the film last night and watching that scene, I literally remember every moment of that scene that we filmed, because there was such sensitivity around us filming it, and questions about whether we were allowed to film it, whether we should be allowed to film it. There was some debate about it. And so I think we went into it with this heightened sense of awareness and sensitivity towards having to capture this thing, and maybe the only time that, you know, outsiders would be allowed to film something like it. And at the same time, not to be totally intrusive. And, you know, inevitably, right, as someone shooting, Andy, I'm sure would agree, you finally have to just give yourself over to the ceremony and become part of the ceremony, hopefully. And I think we succeeded at doing that. I mean, because you know, even in looking at the footage, there weren't moments where people looked self-conscious or awkward or what have you. And
yeah.
So, I mean, that was an honor that we were invited to do that, obviously.
Yeah. And I think the most profound for me experience was interviewing Vine Deloria, who really didn't do film interviews, but cared so much about the legal case and the issues around Devil's Tower that he gave us an interview. And for those of you who want to see some outtakes from Vine's interview, we have those on YouTube. At Hopi, we filmed at the San Francisco Peaks where mining was the issue. This is Dalton Taylor. Robert Redford's photographer was sent with us by ITVS, which funded the completion of the film. And he took some shots. So we actually have some production stills. So here's the whole crew filming at the San Francisco Peaks. Will on camera, Andy recording sound, and we have Liwayne Lomaestua, the Hopi Cultural Preservation Officer, over there on the left. John Schaefer was the photographer who shot these photos. Here's Melinda and I, looking pretty serious, bummed out at what we're seeing behind us. Still bummed out. And on our way to Hopi, we went up north to Black Mesa. Here's the crew filming Vernon Messiasva, the Hopi elder, at one of the springs that was being dried up by the Peabody strip mine, slurrying coal to the Mojave power plant in Nevada. You can see John Schaefer, the photographer's shadow there in the lower left corner. And here's Melinda and I talking with Vernon. The writer, Jessica Abbe, talking to the film crew in the field. And now we move on to the Winnemem Wintu at Mount Shasta. This is Florence Jones, the top doctor of the Winnemem Wintu, who has since passed away. Florence was the one who overruled the younger members of the tribe and said that it was okay for us to film her ceremonies. The Winnemem are unrecognized by the federal government. And the Winnemem now say that Florence knew what she was doing at the time. She somehow trusted us to tell her story well, and that now she actually lives on. And we're really happy to have their story in the film. Here's Florence at Mount Shasta at a fire ceremony, Coonrod Flat. You can see the new leader who we've been working with now for about 25 years, Colleen Sisk, in the purple shirt sitting there on the stump as Florence walks around the fire there. Here's the writer and the director at a ruin in the Bears Ears National Monument now, Cedar Mesa, one of the ancient ancestral ruins of the Pueblo people, in a beautiful, powerful, sacred area. And of course, this is the epic shot. Nick Nabokov, our production assistant, with Will as George Washington and Andy as Abe Lincoln there. We went to Mount Rushmore, kind of an American sacred place. Jessica wrote the great line that even though you can climb Devil's Tower, it is a federal offense to climb the faces of Mount Rushmore. And we'll end with the San Francisco Peaks. I want to introduce folks. Melinda Maynor is a professor of history now at the University of North Carolina, and she directs the Center for the American South. She's continued making films in addition to writing several books. And she's made for PBS A Chef's Life as a co-producer and Somewhere South. And after, I'm gonna just introduce everybody, and then Melinda's gonna lead us off with some thoughts. Jessica Abbe came to film production, producing the #1 Bay Area Backroads television show, and went on to co-produce and write many documentaries, including Standing on Sacred Ground, which Will, Andy, and I all also worked on with Quinn Costello, who's with us, and Tantoo Cardinal as well. Will Parrinello is with the Mill Valley Film Group, and he and his partner John Antonelli make the Goldman Environmental Prize films. Will made Dreaming of Tibet and is currently producing a documentary, Troubled Water, about environmental defenders who have given their lives protecting water and other sacred places in indigenous and other territories. Andy Black, our cinematographer, shot Arwin Curry's film, World of Ursula Le Guin for American Experience, in addition to many other films like Sam Green and Bill Siegel's The Weather Underground and Michael Moore's Sicko. And so Andy was our cinematographer. Will shot some of In the Light of Reverence and edited. Jessica was our co-producer and writer, and Melinda was our co-producer. So Melinda, why don't you start us off with just some thoughts about, what working on this film meant for you and how it altered maybe the course of your life.
Well, it's so interesting that you talked about the pipe ceremony, because I wasn't there for that production season. I think actually it was shot maybe right after I was hired onto the project in 97 or so. And, I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, which, if you don't happen to know, is the largest tribe east of the Mississippi. It's also the 9th largest tribe in the nation. And I came to Sacred Land Film Project from Stanford, from getting a master's in documentary film production and having made a couple of short films in that program and worked on other stuff. I had some very, 24-year-old ideas about what constituted relationships and ethics between Native people and non-Natives. So when I was hired immediately, sort of before that, you guys went to Devil's Tower and did that particular scene, I really was like, wow, is that really okay? Like, they're coming back from the field, like telling these stories about how they were accepted eventually into the circle, and it wound up being this powerful natural experience. And I think that my sort of antenna went up about not only questioning the assumptions of outsiders making films about Native people, but my own assumptions as a Native person. And time and time again, I confronted a variety of feelings of being an insider and an outsider in relationship to the people that we were filming. On one particular moment, we were at Hopi for the 100th time filming, and again got some amazing access to Hopi's cultural preservation officer and one of their other tribal government staff members talking about the sacredness of springs in the villages. And so I was part of, and I witnessed the kind of relationship building and conversation that had to take place for us to be able to film at a spring. In which village were we in? Mashonga, yeah. So, you know, when I got to see that, I realized that, first of all, the story about the pipe ceremony that they were telling me was true. And that the way of gaining, the way of elevating or amplifying a story is primarily through relationship building. And it doesn't just happen because you're a member of a certain race, and it doesn't not happen because you're a member of a certain race. For me, as a Lumbee, I am not Hopi. I'm not Lakota. I'm not Winnemem. I'm not a member of those communities. I have no kinship relationships to those communities. The fact that I'm a Native person brings that type of skepticism I was talking about at my initial months with the project. But eventually, I learned that every intact sovereign community has its own definitions of belonging that have to be elevated. And so the flip side of that, of course, is when someone brings you into that sovereign sense of belonging, it's an incredible feeling. And it's one of the reasons that the film holds up so well, I think, is because relationships were built. Folks in Native communities were trusting us with these very, very important topics, life or death topics, really. This is not an incidental matter, never has been. And so that sense of belonging or bringing into a relationship with a sovereign community results in a different type of image that shows up on the screen. And it results in a different way of telling the story itself. So the flip side of that is when you feel like you're an outsider because you're not Indian enough. And it was interesting that none of the Native people that I encountered working on this project ever approached me with that kind of attitude. Just because I wasn't a member of their tribal community or they weren't familiar with my culture, no one once said to me, "What kind of Indian are you?" You know, I had gotten that question my whole life from non-natives, but never from other natives on this project. The one time working on the project that I did get a question from a non-native was from a very fancy New Age author in Mount Shasta, California, who had been on Oprah. And we were having dinner with him because I think you remember this, Will, and Andy was sitting next to me. We've been filming at the spring at Mount Shasta since like 5 in the morning. We were very tired. I'd had a good risotto at a nice restaurant. And then this gentleman had popped out with this comment that we, meaning all the people at the table, were more Indian than the Indians because we cared more about the environment or about their sacred places than they did. Yeah. And hopefully some of you have had this moment where you feel your ancestors pull up their chairs behind you and say, "What are you going to do, Melinda?" You know? And I thought to myself, as one of my more diplomatic moments in life, I thought to myself, if I looked like Pocahontas, he would not be saying this. Mm-hmm. But he didn't recognize me as Native because all of his notions about identity were totally different than the Native people that we worked with on this film. They were willing to embrace folks of whatever ancestry and belonging to communities to help amplify the stories that they had been fighting for, the places they had been fighting for. Here was a gentleman who had all the sort of resources and privilege and notoriety in the world who had 1,000 wrong assumptions. So we proceeded, I think, to have a way too long conversation with this guy about what he was getting wrong. And it also brought to me a sense about the film that we needed tackle some of these misconceptions head on. And so Will in the editing room, you know, and Jessica, both of you just honing in on what are the statements that our participants made that were the most impactful and the most challenging and the most direct. And we had to put those on screen, and we had to make the rest of it work around that, right? Because our job was to uneducate people like this really famous mainstream person, you know. So anyway, I just have taken that lesson forward with me my entire life, you know, being able to notice in particular the ways in which folks have to be uneducated and how you have to hit them head on. And I think that's one of the reasons why my colleagues at UNC in religious studies or American Indian studies, they use the film every semester to this day, not because they know me at all, because
It's so great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Melinda. Before getting to Jessica, I want to acknowledge that remember the moment when we were all sitting at dinner in La Honda around the table, and we had about 100 working titles, and they were all not working. And Melinda walked in. I remember you standing there and saying, "How about In the Light of Reverence?" And we were all, "What?" And you know, you reminded us that Johnson Holy Rock had beautifully used that phrase, and it just didn't sound like a film title. Yeah. But I think it just hung in the air. You know, the ancestors pulled up their chairs, you know, and banged the cups a little bit, and that was it from that moment on. That was such a great moment. I mean, again, I just want to mention to people that if you want to be asking questions, which we will take as soon as each person has a little reflection, please put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those, and we'll let you ask those questions in a few minutes. But so Jessica, what are your memories of our collaboration together?
Well, I'm going to refer to some notes I have because I'm a writer, and I do a little better if I write things down first so that I can remember what it was I wanted to say. But there was one story that came up while you were talking at the beginning when you guys were talking about the ceremony at Matotipila. And that was in the editing room. Those kinds of experiences continued. I particularly remember, Will, the night that the tapes of Florence in trance would not digitize. Right. And we did everything we could think of technically. And finally, Toby was like walking around the house with sage and root in one hand burning, and, you know, and after many, many hours, she accepted that transition to digital form, and we had a film.
Good memory. I just
remember walking outside the basement door where we were editing, and just saying to Melinda, I had never met her. It's like, sorry, I can't come out right now. We'll do the interview in a few minutes, and just slamming the door in your face and going back to the crisis.
That's right. It was the same day.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Same moment.
It was a huge moment. I guess I want to talk a little bit first about the writing of this film. I remember recommending that we have a female narrator. And at that time, you know, late 1990s, it was really still the prevailing view that women's voices were not authoritative enough for documentary narration. And, you know, basically men would tune them out. So we were already struggling to get audiences, struggling with the making of this film, knowing we wanted to get audiences to pay attention to Native American sacred sites and these conflicts. And it really wasn't a mainstream concern. And so we really tried to give weight to male and female voices, and having these two narrators, the luminous Tantoo Cardinal, I'm so glad you're with us here today, and Peter Coyote. And you know, I just still, to this day, when I listen to this film and hear your two voices, it's still just an incredible thrill. And with that same thing, we were trying to balance both, I think, traditional and contemporary views of indigenous culture, of
Can you shut the fuck up, bitch?
ecology. Okay, we got Zoom bombed.
Oh my God, zoom bomb! Everyone take cover, quick! Oh my God, the bomb's gonna explode! Holy shit, there's 46 of y'all muttered chodes in here. Oh, how you doing?
How do I get rid of them?
Oh, do not mute me. Who just muted me? Who just muted me right there? Who just...
Hard to ignore stupidity, isn't it?
You know, I'm so sorry, everybody.
It's okay. I think they're gone.
I think they're gone.
Fiona has saved the day. I just want to apologize to everybody. We're going to lock the meeting, thanks to Fiona. And, you know, we had 4 great weeks with none of that. And for me, I've just got to say that my experience working on these films for so many years has led to these moments where I feel like what happens, I'm just forced to get a taste of what it is that Indigenous people have to deal with in the racism and the stupidity of our culture. You know, it's just so prevalent and embarrassing. And I apologize to everybody. Melinda, I'm going to try to unmute you, Melinda.
Okay, am I muted, Toby?
No, you're on. Melinda, you're okay now. We're
Yeah,
all
I
back.
can hear. Mhm.
Okay, if you guys can hear me, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, I just, you know, before we're so rudely interrupted by people who don't have anything better to do, I was talking about how the film really tried to have a balance of viewpoints, some of which were pretty extreme, but the way in which we were trying to present it was really, I think, one of the strengths of this group collaboration. And it was a really huge challenge. People trusted us with very deeply held beliefs, and we tried to pretty sensitively present these viewpoints so that they could be heard and not simply dismissed. So I think that's a rare thing in a lot of filmmaking today, when people tend to go for more confrontational approaches, a lot of sensation, a lot of hammer swings to kind of get the adrenaline rush. And rather than that tingling feeling you get when the hair rises on your arms because you hear a beautiful voice or you are seeing or learning something for the first time. And I also think that when we made this film, it took us so much longer than people take generally to make a film now, where things can be so much faster. But and that was a little more like the experience I'd had working as a television producer on a daily or a weekly show. Things were they moved really fast. So we really got to take the time to craft this film. We didn't want to, we just kept having to stop and raise more money. Anyway, drew it out. We had to stop. We had to wait for permission for a community to allow us in. There was a lot in that way, but mostly it was just, we were so into the art of documentary and, being able to reduce, I think it was 120 hours of footage to 73 minutes. And the drafts and the rewrites were, numbered in the dozens. And, I should have seen that coming, but I didn't. And I remember early on, discussing with Toby, I was pretty naive and idealistic. And by the way, Toby and I are married to each other. So this was a period of intense togetherness, working and living together. And at one point I asked him, so how long was your first rough cut of that film you made about the Four Corners? And he said, 7 hours. And I was so shocked. But you know what? It was the right approach. It was good. So I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to tell you when this project started for me was 2 weeks after Toby and I got married. And it was the first time we went camping with the Winnemem tribe at their annual camp below Mount Shasta. And Florence Jones was there and Colleen Sisk. and that was the first time I'd met them. And I had never felt so awkward in my life. It was like being at someone else's family reunion. And I just had no idea how to behave. You know, I didn't have to behave anyway. I could have just felt a little more comfortable being myself. But it was difficult because I was from the same town as Florence and Colleen. I grew up there, and I did not understand the history of the place where I grew up. So this filmmaking was also a re-education for me. And so much that was hidden to me as a child was not just the incredible brutality and the genocidal history of Americans coming into what became known as California, but also the richness of these cultures, and in particular, the culture that was right there where I was living that I knew nothing about. And, you know, I'll never get over it. And I'm going to carry that sadness with me my whole life. But I also have so much joy because of having gone through this experience and having the privilege to be able to present to other people some of those realizations that we all went through as a group. So I think it's quite personal for a lot of us. Documentary filmmakers are a tragic bunch, and it's really why we need to have a sense of humor and maybe some darling little kids running around, which we did. I had 2 babies in the course of making this film. Miles and Fiona, they're both with us here today. And, you know, they helped us so much not to get lost in the depressing parts.
Thanks, Jessica. Will, would love to hear some stories from you, but I just want to reflect for 1 second that I think for me, the greatest lesson taught by Jessica and Will and Andy in the field, as we all shared camera duties and all 3 of us capable of being directors, and then Melinda joining the team, that was collaboration. I'd worked as kind of the white man director on a few films, fighting ego battles. And for me, the most powerful experience with making In the Light of Reverence was the collaboration with the 4 of you and other folks who were listening. And so thank you for that lesson. Will, Parrinello, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. This is really a pleasure to be together talking about the film, as it was to watch it again last night for the first time in years. And I'm just proud of the work that we did. And you're right about the collaboration. We truly made this film together. And that for me was a unique experience, right? I mean, my partner, John Antonelli, and I had made films together, but this was a much bigger team and much deeper collaboration that's just wonderful and has gone on to influence how I make films. Kind of echoing a little bit of what's already been said, I learned from you, Toby, things that I have taken with me in my own career about working with cultures that aren't my own. Indigenous cultures in this instance, and it applies to other indigenous cultures I've been lucky enough to work with, which is to just be present and to just sit and listen. Don't talk so much, listen, absorb, observe, and don't run in with the camera, you know, wait to be asked. I remember on the first shoot, you said, we may sit here for 5 days and not shoot something. And I know it's probably going to make you crazy, but, you know, let's just go with that. And, you know, it did take a while, but that's an incredible lesson that has served me, because as I've worked with Indigenous communities around the world, understandably, they've said at times, well, you know, yes, you're here and you want to help and tell our story, but you're here to appropriate something. You're here to take something. You talk about taking pictures. And, you know, and so the answer to that question is to just be and listen and be respectful and build relationships, as we talked about. But that's a gift that I took away from the project. Another gift was that at that time, and Jessica alluded to it earlier, I had worked with women, but not so closely on a team. And that was a gift, because the intelligence that Jessica and Melinda brought to the project, their sensitivity, their compassion. They were tough, but they were soft. It was this really important perspective that allowed us to bring that out in ourselves. Again, that's just really served my films as I've moved forward. So that was an incredible experience to have that. And uniquely, watching the film last night, I realized that the women in the film who represent the dominant culture, it's a Park Service supervisor at Matotipila.
Deb Liggett,
It's a Forest Service supervisor on Mount Shasta.
Sharon Haywood,
And it was less a person of power, but an important voice and perspective. It was an anthropologist in the Grand Canyon with the Hopi story.
Jan Balsam. Yeah.
And the women all spoke about the issues in a way that was sensitive, in a way that our culture doesn't typically look at these problems. So those women in power all made the right decision to honor and respect indigenous cultures to the extent they were allowed to, given the law, right? There were always, so the specific would be, right, at Matotipila, which we call Devil's Tower, they chose to put in place a voluntary climbing ban during the month of June, the most sacred month to the Lakota. And when they do their sun dances, and some climbers chose to not abide by it, but many did. I mean, so powerful things around women, pointing to the importance of us needing women leaders, obviously, is part of I guess, what I'm getting at. I want to give Andy a chance to talk, but I want to just share one humorous story of production and the challenges that we face and getting close, to our host.
Before you go there, Will, I just want to point out that I noticed last night in the movie, like from the indigenous perspective, the three really clearest voices are all women, I think. Elaine Quiver, Florence, and Colleen. I mean, really, Vine's great, he's big ideas, but those three voices in the film are the ones who talk in a language that people can understand from outside of the community. And I was really struck in watching it yesterday that how powerful those three voices were. So it's just more on the...
No, really good point. You're right. Of course. Yeah. It was like three layers that were really important and influential. I guess one other thing to share about learning something from working with Toby, and Jessica had this sensibility as well. When we did the oppositional interviews, I had never been, I started in television news, so I certainly had done opposition interviews, but it was news. It was much lighter, much more superficial, shorter stories. We went into those interviews and I wondered, like, how are we going to get impactful statements from people? Are they going to really tell us what they think, feel, so that we can truly have a sense of this opposition? And Toby and Jess just said, we can't go in and set these people up to be the bad guys, to be the straw dog. We can't go in with gotcha questions. We have to go in and be respectful. And my recollection, Toby, you can correct me, but almost every time we had wrapped our interview and the subject of the interview would say something like, wow, that was easy. You hardly even asked me what I thought. You didn't really give me a chance to say, and Toby and Andy and I would sort of look at each other out the corner of our eyes. I would indicate, yeah, we're still rolling. And then these incendiary comments would come out. The people in the cafe outside of Matotipila, Devil's Tower, talking about how there were no indigenous people before we came. Our family's been here for 7 generations and they don't take good care of it. And they were laughing like lunatics. You're thinking, it was mine, the things that people were comfortable saying,
yeah,
by us being respectful of them as we were respectful of the indigenous culture, right? That's so
the guy who owned Woodruff Butte, who bulldozed the Hopi shrines and said that, well, they wouldn't tell me where they were, and I got the right to do, run my bulldozer. Yeah.
Just time-wise, do I have time for one humorous story? No, Andy should talk. That's enough. I've spoken for long enough. We're running out of time. Yeah.
I was really fortunate to work on this movie because Toby literally was the first person ever to pay me to do a piece of film work. When I sounded it as his film previous to this, which was a Nova. And then he gave me an opportunity to make $100 a day teaching myself to do sound because he couldn't afford to pay anybody else. So, but, you know, I was pretty newly out of undergraduate school, and I had been a religion major, and, you know, I had no idea really what I was doing. And we started going on these, John and Toby and I started going to Hopi, working on this film about the Hopi Indians, who, Toby, I think you've already been working with them for 20 years or 15 years or something by then. So Toby was, you know, very deeply involved already. But I was just like, we're going down to Hopi, oh great. And then we'd go down and we'd sit around, we'd talk to people, we'd have a bunch of meals, then we'd go home. And this must have happened 4 or 5 times. And I was like, this is filmmaking? Really? I could get into this. But, you know, it taught me, you know, that you really had to, you know, get a group of people to trust you, no matter who they are, but especially with Indigenous people, because, you know, they've been, well, for obvious reasons. And I think that I've carried that through my work from then to now. And what it really brought to me was that, you know, coming from a religious studies perspective, like when you work with somebody and when you take their picture and when you tell their story, like you always have to have this idea of what their perspective is and like how they function in the world, almost from a religious perspective. Because you know, we're all spiritual beings one way or another. And I don't know if I ever could have learned that on a better project than this. You know, just learning to like respect and you know, allow people to have their dignity while you're working with them is such an important thing in my work. And that all came out of working with Toby on this film and subsequent films. So.
Thanks. Hey, we have one question already. So let's go with that. And then Will, you can work your story in as we go along. But Kate Bannister asks, please share your ideas about the re-education of America in terms of policy, institutional change, cultural changes that we all think are important. I would just quickly say that, you know, being honored to work on the subject of sacred places and being trusted to translate the cultural significance of Indigenous people's connection to wide landscapes, including specific sacred sites, has, for me, brought about the sort of model that if we could have an economic system that honored the spirituality of land and cultural connection to land, and that was built into economic and policy around technology and environmental policy. And so environmentalists wouldn't just care about the physicality of water pollution, but they would understand the sacredness of water and the spiritual nature of relationship to plants and animals that Indigenous people have been trying to teach outsiders about for years. So for me, the institutional change is about literally protecting sacred places and weaving that sensibility into our relationship with land. And for people who ask about at the end of a film, well, what can I do? My answer, the best answer I ever came up with was work under the leadership of local Indigenous people in your area to protect or restore a sacred place. And so that's a personal thing and an institutional thing, but it all involves understanding and respecting sacred places of Indigenous communities, which, as we found when we made Standing on Sacred Ground, is a global phenomenon. We didn't want to make In the Light of Reverence about the United States at first, but we ended up having to do that because we just scraped it together the way we'd been talking about. You know, we'd raise $3,000 and we'd get to go do a shoot, and we were stuck in the United States. But what a gift. I mean, it was like In the Light of Reverence was the film that needed to be made before Standing on Sacred Ground. So Melinda, do you have thoughts about institutional and cultural change needed?
Yeah, where do I start? I'm probably gonna try to keep it sort of simple, in the sense that I had a breakthrough moment. You know, I went from working on this film and being immersed in the documentary world to jumping into the world of historical scholarship and university cultures and teaching and writing books and that kind of thing. Research of a different type. And over these many years, I have retained so many principles that I learned working on this film the voices that we consistently heard from Vine and from Colleen, from Elaine Quiver and others, that all kind of added up to we're all on sacred land and everywhere is sacred. And so in the process of kind of acculturating myself to a different institutional environment in a university, I've learned to begin with my students by asking them to think deeply about what it means that this is still native land. It didn't used to be, but that there are active governmental jurisdictions operating all over the territory now known as the United States, which is an illegitimate occupier. And the basis of the United States occupation of this land is a faulty, outdated notion called the doctrine of discovery that comes from the Catholic Church. And so I tend to approach these sorts of institutional change questions and unlearning by asking them to reverse or kind of flip around the history that they think they know, and think then about, reflect on how that history is present in our everyday lives now. So would we have the disproportionate death on the Navajo reservation that's unfolding as we speak if the relationships that Toby just spoke about were fully acknowledged? You know, if the doctrine of discovery did not alienate land from spirituality the way that it does, and did not justify the so-called conquering or occupation of non-Christian peoples, would we have these vast disparities in any part of American society that we have now, not just the ones that Native people experience, but the ones that non-Native people experience as well? So I'm asking my students increasingly to just think about colonialism, not as a separate phenomenon that occurred in the past, but as something that's fundamental to the way our government, just from a policy perspective anyway, from the way our government operates now. And then asking them, what will it take to undo that, you know? And then that the relationship between things like sexism and racism and homophobia and the kind of clueless environmentalism that doesn't see these resources as having spiritual value, you know, that the connection between all of those status hierarchies becomes more clear when you imagine that they developed as part of a historical process that started out with the colonization of the rest of the world by Western Europe.
And if I can jump in and just say, you know, in a short form, another answer to this question is just what Vine says near the end of the film. You know, we're living in a rights society. People are so concerned about their rights, they don't want to wear a mask, you know, because it's more important than their responsibility to not infect someone else. And we, you know, Oren Lyons also taught us that, saying, you did okay on that Bill of Rights, but what's really needed is a Bill of Responsibilities. And we're still waiting, still working towards that.
You know, there's a little bit of rights for places in Central and South America, right? I believe in Ecuador, you know, rivers having rights, places, you know, of power, spiritual places that are sacred to indigenous people. So it's a small slice, but it's encouraging that there at least is the beginning of a sensibility that way, that a sacred place itself has rights. And I think we have to just end with the simple quote from Florence Jones, the top doctor of the Winnemem-Wintu, who's no longer with us, who simply said, we have thousands of years of knowledge of how to be on the land. I wish people would listen to us. We can't just all be dumb and die. And it's humorous and sad all at the same time, you know.
Yeah. Another question has come in. Thanks, you guys. Could you give a quick update on the Hopi, Lakota, and Winnemem-Wintu since In the Light of Reverence was completed? And I'll just quickly try to do that. The Winnemem continue to fight the federal government on many levels. There's a proposal to raise the height of Shasta Dam, which would flood for the second time their homeland. So though they succeeded at stopping the ski resort on Mount Shasta, the downside of that is that New Agers continue to flock to Mount Shasta, whereas when we filmed, it was crystals in the spring that was the insult and the polluting force. Now people are actually dumping cremation ashes into the spring and into Panther Meadows, which is a horrific pollution of that place. So the New Age threat continues, the Shasta Dam threat continues, and Colleen does incredible positive things like the Run for Salmon, creating a community around prayer and ceremony and involving hundreds of people doing a journey to call the salmon back and bring them back from the brink of extinction. The Hopi, you know, they're in the middle of the Navajo reservation. So right now the big crisis out there is the COVID-19 outbreak amongst the Navajo, which is a very sad story, to be sure. They're still dealing with ski resort and use of recycled wastewater to make snow on the San Francisco peaks, which is a you know, complete desecration of that sacred mountain. There's still, the good news at Hopi, I guess, is that the slurry line that carried the water to the power plant and was depleting their springs was shut down a few years ago. Many things contributed to that, but certainly the Hopi opposition to the slurry line was a main factor. It ended up being a Sierra Club lawsuit that shut down the Mojave power plant that actually killed the slurry line, but now Peabody Coal Company has shut down also the strip mine. So coal hopefully is on its way out. The Page power plant has also closed, but all of these issues in protecting the sacred places amongst the Hopi, you know, they continue to fight. They were instrumental in getting Bears Ears National Monument created, along with the Navajo, Ute, and Zuni. And of course, Trump has gutted that national monument. We're hoping that that's just a temporary setback. And that was a profound step forward by Obama, recognizing a sacred cultural landscape. And hopefully that will be co-managed in the future by the right traditional spiritual people amongst those tribes and the Bureau of Land Management. Which reminds me that the guy, Will, you talked about the oppositional voice. You know, we interviewed Perry Penley in Denver, head of the Mountain States Legal Foundation, this sort of James Watt, kind of right-wing, wise use guy who is really out there. Well, he's now head of the Bureau of Land Management. Trump has made him head of the Bureau of Land Management, and which is a completely freaky development. And the Lakota, you know, the climbers at Devil's Tower, it continues. Deb Liggett was followed by Dorothy Firecloud, a Native American woman superintendent, who actually told us she used the film many times to go over to the Ponderosa Cafe community over there and the racists that we filmed and build bridges with the surrounding community in Wyoming, and felt like she was doing, you know, making a lot of progress there. And then they brought in another guy to be superintendent, and suddenly we couldn't get data anymore about the climbers and whether they were stopping climbing. And so that's an ongoing battle. And of course, the Black Hills, you know, the Lakota continue to not accept the land claim. There's still some uranium deposits that are a threat in the Black Hills. And I think voting rights is one of the big issues out there now. Is, you know, a lot of the folks out there at Pine Ridge don't have street addresses. So there was a big voting sort of snafu there recently, but everybody's continuing. The younger generation has picked up the battle. Standing Rock, I think, was an incredible turning point that had to do with all of these stories. And I think all of us felt a little bit like maybe In the Light of Reverence helped, you know, till the soil a little bit, sort of educate because the thing about Standing Rock that struck me was that outsiders and allies took a backseat and sent money and took leadership from Native people, and even Earth Justice in the lawsuit, you know, did a completely different kind of job, respecting the sacred sites, making a big deal out of the treaty rights. So, you know, I think there has been some progress since the film came out, even though the battles continue. Will, you got a story? You got a funny story?
Yeah, I noticed that Amy Capen is with us, and I wanted to just give a shout out. Amy was one of my super talented assistant editors, and I just remember her beginning to shine and me giving her scenes to cut overnight when I couldn't be working, and her just doing such a great job. And she's a talented filmmaker in her own right now. So I just wanted to say, hey, Amy, glad you're with us. But, hey, here you are. One of the great stories that comes to mind, you know, we were lucky to get close to so many of the people we worked with, and Lee Jenkins, who's the Hopi Cultural Preservation Officer, you know, became a good friend. I mean, Lee ended up being really instrumental in cajoling me into proposing to the woman who became my wife, which is really a telling story in and of itself. But I want to talk about, we went to film at the Peabody Coal Company. We couldn't get permission to go in to film that huge, gigantic scar on the earth, but the Hopi have rights to go in and collect coal whenever they choose. That's one of the benefits they get for having signed that land over. And so Lee was going to hide us under a blanket in the back of his double cab truck. So he said, okay, we're pulling up here now. We're getting close to the guard station. Hug the ground, get as close to the ground as you can, and, you know, keep still. And I said, Lee, what happens if they catch us? You know, and he said, we? Yeah, I said, what are we going to, I'm sorry, I said, what are we going to do if they catch us? And he said, he picked up the blanket. What do you mean we, white man? I don't know what the hell you're doing in my truck. Now shut up and sit still. And then we went through the gate. And it, you know, that was just an indication of Lee's great sense of humor and how we could kid each other that way. And it was wonderful. I don't know. Andy, you have any great production stories that come to mind from your perspective?
Well, just picking up on Lee, we did watch the World Series with him. The Indians and the Braves played each other. Yeah. He was all over stuff. He was doing the tomahawk chalk the whole time and always trying to cajole us into, you know, taking one side or another. I think we all were wise enough to abstain from it, but.
I remember Lee at one point kind of, again, looking over, sort of looking askance at the corner of his eye and saying, I could do this, but you can't, in reference to the tomahawk chop.
Yeah.
Hey, I wonder, Tantoo, could I ask you a question? Can I unmute you and ask a question? You have been such an incredible presence in film for so many years. And thank you for being the voice, the storyteller in our films. But I'm just wondering what you have seen as a result of all of your work, you know, portraying, you know, such a compassionate and, you know, soulful presence for so many years, Dances with Wolves all the way on. You know, have you seen, do you feel that there's been progress and a change as a result of film storytelling?
I was just writing this because I'm gonna scoot out the side door here. This was a moment because one of the glimmers of hope was, excuse me, was the prophecy or the vision that there would be a generation of these people, these discoverers of a doctrine that they brought over that was just deadly for all living things. And that there would be a time where their children would be our allies. And so I was constantly looking for that. That's one of the things that kept me alive in those very dark days of absolute, the arrogance of ignorance, and that these things that I was trying to incorporate into a character or into a story or bring another idea into a scenario that was very well staked out. There was no room for some Indian woman to come in off the side and start hauling stuff out of her basket. There wasn't that kind of room. So there was constantly a search for open minds and hearts that really did want to change the narrative, wanted to get to the truth of what was behind all this. You know, the generation of people who are our friends or to be our friends. And in that search, for true friendship, there's a lot of nicks and bruises and horrific events with handing a gem over to somebody who has no concept of respect. And so for me, it was a very important moment in that. And I have carried that film around with me and just hounded people about having a look at it. And it was hard too, because we get encrusted in oppression and in this world that is definitely, our name is not on the deed. Yeah. And so it's been an absolute struggle. And meeting a moment like this and people like you who have respect for that very sacred place. And the fact that they showed you that very sacred place means that you were sussed out. They were pretty sure that you're okay. And it's a good thing that you were okay, because who knows, eh? What would have happened if you were going to have your butt kicked? I wouldn't want to see that. And so it was a beautiful experience, and very honored to have been a part of it, just as I am. You know, I just feel like we're the last ones to know, really. And so we're connected with this massive, oh, you did this, and look what you've done. And you have really made progress. And for me, anyways, I just kind of get the feeling I better catch on, because this is rolling. Our ancestors are on the case, very in charge. And through those 50 years of moving through the industry, I was just having a conversation with somebody just a few days ago and thinking about how it used to take a longer time for somebody to get knocked on the side of the head for something, or, you know, to be taught for stepping outside of something, that something wasn't done right. It used to take a longer time, probably used to take generations, but now things have just speeded up to such a great degree that it happens really quickly, that there's a ramification from it. I don't know, do you guys find that too? I just feel like things are just moving so fast that the work that you're doing is just so crucial in that foundation, that we should know from what has just happened that natural force is in charge, and that what we create from here, for it to succeed and build and grow, that I think it really has to be connected to those responsibilities, those foundations that are natural forces in charge. And so if we're building something, we have to build something that is respectful of that, is knowledgeable, is immersed in the nuance of what that is, I think. And I think those are the places that we are right now. And that's what I experienced. It was very exciting. And also so difficult, especially, you know, in the Light of Reverence was so, I didn't even care about how hard the stories were, because it was so important to be told. Yeah. And then standing on sacred ground is just where it really got heavy. What are we going to do about this? And I mean, the exciting thing about the times that we're in now, I think that those answers are going to be quite starkly clearer.
Yeah.
Much more quickly than they have been. It's just astounding watching what's going on those national levels, and the feeling that I'm getting from so many people, oh, I can't do anything about that. However, we will focus on this.
Yeah.
So, you know, like those good old Christians like to say, Trump is doing God's work.
And on that note, hey, I just remember our experiences in the recording studio, Tantoo. The very first time I met you, you were so open and friendly and present, and I just never forget the feeling of why is she being so nice to me? You know, I just really remember that. And then when I came up to Toronto for Standing on Sacred Ground, I remember you had to run out of the studio because you were going to a flash mob. Which was a brand new thing then, and you know your activism in the street was continuing to just to mix your film career with such a great social justice presence out there in the world. So beautiful. So thank you for what you just said. We're a few minutes after the hour, so I guess if Melinda, you probably have to run on to your next faculty meeting. Do you have a closing thought?
Just like Tantoo said, that helped me so much in this particular moment of uncertainty, to be reminded that the ancestors are in charge, and that the kind of clapback that comes to colonizers that have not learned their proper place in this land are being reminded all of the time, in different ways. And it's not always Native people that have to do the reminding, but there are too many opportunities, or too many times that I still confront, where I think, gosh, if I could tell a story through a film about this particular moment, it would do the work that in the Light of Reverence did. It would really help get at the underlying issues behind these divides. It would help get at the kind of underlying corruption that is embedded in our Constitution, and embedded in so many different parts of our society. And I think as a Native person, I have this sort of glimmers of awareness, and then they fly away too often. But what we get to do is, and by participating in storytelling, is, well, like Spider-Woman did, knit all these things together in a way that might be beyond our immediate understanding, but is nevertheless with us at all times, and her.
That's really beautiful. What you're talking about, Melinda, and what Tantoo talked about is reminding me of something else that I think we all learned, those of us who are not Indigenous, which is, and I think it's important, I try to take this with me just when I go out on a hike or something, that the idea of taking pictures, we take things, we go in expecting to have an experience and to take something away from it. And what we learned was to bring something. Don't go in thinking you're taking something, to bring something. And part of that is going in with an open heart. And part of that is thinking about being in supplication to place. And when I think that way, and I have to keep reminding myself, it's a totally different experience. And so I think that's something to share with non-Indigenous people. And I don't know if that resonates for Andy or Toby or Jess or not, but that does for me deeply.
Absolutely. And I just want to, Jessica, give you a chance to have a final word here too. But with working with you guys, collaborating to tell this story, I know I said it before, but it was just such a profound experience to come back. I want to really recognize Jessica. The credit of writer, people sometimes think that, okay, those words of narration were written, but when she mentioned, the 7-hour rough cut for my first film, we come back with all these incredible ingredients, and somebody needs to sort of cook the meal and figure out, exactly how to put it together and put a strong emotional arc to the story. And I just want to acknowledge, I mean, Melinda and Will, you had a lot to do with that, but Jessica, as a writer, you know, you really took
Had the
the
most.
footage and figured out how to weave it like Spider-Woman together to make something lasting. So thank you, Jessica. And what are your final thoughts?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that nice bit of recognition. I'll tell you all just briefly that in the last few years, I've moved away from filmmaking and I've written a novel, which I just finished. It's not published yet. It's called Some Greater Awakening. And, you know, things go on. I'll tell you what it's about. It's kind of about what happens in the 1970s when a kind of free-spirited, younger, hip generation tries to keep the fires of 1960s activism burning in the rural West in Northern California. So that's your preview. I also just wanted to shout out to some of the people I'm seeing here in this gallery, Amy Capen, Amy Corbin, both of whom worked with us for a long time. Leroy Clark, who's here, you know, so I have so loved working with you over the years. Quinn Costello, Vicente Franco, Ana Caminos, who was my personal, you know, greatest supporter during the process of making this film because we had daughters the exact same day. We met each other 2 weeks later. And, you know, we've been great friends ever since and helped each other out innumerably, you know, over these years. Miles, Fiona, thank you for letting us make this film. It was an amazing experience to do that while raising children. And everybody who, you know, collaborated with us, our aunties and uncles in that process. And, you know, thanks to all of you too. I'm kicking it over to Andy.
Yeah. Well, Andy and Will, I just want to say, you know, that it doesn't come out in this kind of conversation, but I'm writing a memoir too. And the Devil's Tower filming trip we took is about a 40-page chapter because of the saga that we went through trying to be respectful, take our time, but also, you know, collect the footage and just working with you guys in the field. I mean, Andy, you in particular, you know, you have a gentleness about you that is really helpful in these stressful situations. I want to thank you for that. And, you know, Will is a little more gung-ho, right? When I would back off and say, no, we can't ask for that shot, Will would kind of elbow me sometimes at just the right moment and say, no, we're going to get that shot. And, you know, and we did. So I have a bug on my nose. I have an ancestor visiting. I don't know if you can see this.
I just remember those days, Will, when you and Amy were doing shifts in the basement where we had the editing room. Yeah. And then when you weren't there, Toby was there, and that seat was always warm, 24 hours a day. And we had Toby working out in what had been the garage. And I had to work in a little trailer and try and keep out of sight of Fiona, because if she saw me, she'd just go nuts, because it was like, wait, Mom, you're supposed to be here with me. And you know, we had one bathroom. It was really a fun little time in that cabin in the woods that, you know.
It definitely was. I mean, you know, we got to experience the kids growing up on a daily basis in a way that wouldn't have been the same, and daily relationship with Melinda, which was such a gift, all of us together. You know, it's like a family for sure. And, you know, your writing is absolutely beautiful. That struck me watching the film last night, Jessica, and I have but one regret, that I haven't really worked with you again since then, which is really a mistake. I hope we can rectify that. I hope I can draw you back into the film world at some point. But, you know, Andy and I had a very unique relationship. I just want to end on, you know, we keep talking about community. It's unique that you would have 4 people shooting one film, you know, John Canoop, Toby McLeod, Will Parrinello, Andy Black. And when Toby first proposed, you know, I want to have Andy shoot film, because I wasn't shooting film anymore and I wasn't confident in my ability. If you're not up on it, it's not, you know, it's too expensive, it's too technical. So how about if Andy shoots film and you'll record sound, and you'll shoot video and Andy will record sound. And I didn't know Andy. I said, if he's up for it, that's great. But he and I just need to spend time together to get to know each other, because the male ego can be a really difficult thing. And we have to know that we can trust each other and that we're going to support each other. And, you know, I describe our relationship as being like brothers, you know, as it is with Toby for sure. But, you know, that trust and that bonding and that kind of supporting each other. And the film looks beautiful. I'm sorry to toot our own horn, but all of us, including John Canoop and Toby, did a great job of filming. Jessica crafting the story through her and her beautiful words. Tantoo, it's like, okay, let's have Tantoo. Do more narration. Anyway, I'm sorry, Andy, share a final thought, please.
And let me jump in and say Susie Alexander is with us too. I just saw her name. Thank you, Susie.
Well, I totally share Will's thoughts about, you know, becoming kind of a very familial situation. And Will and I have gone on to work for, you know, whatever it is, 25 years since then. And Toby and I are still working together after what we started in 1986, I think, or something like that. So, you know, it has been an enduring collaboration, and it's been incredibly rich in my life and career. And unfortunately, I don't get too much on the back end of things, and that's where a lot of stories happen that I'm not part of, but certainly feel part of that family as well. I just want to say, you know, having known Toby so long, he is such a maestro, and he is so tireless in his vision for what is right and what needs to be done. And I just, to this day, I find it an inspiration that you're able to continue, and you don't even realize you're doing it. You know, you just do what you do. It's like, you know, that story, what one fish says to the other, how's the water today? And the other fish says, what water? You know, it's just so much a part of who you are, and that vision and that, you know, ability to weave the story together, but also the crew together, and be your beautiful neurotic self the whole time. You know, I really want to thank you for having made this movie and your subsequent movies, and, you know, all you've done to bring us together and be together. So thank you.
Thanks. And before we give Melinda the final word, I'd like to call on the younger generation, Fiona McLeod, who saved me from that Zoom bomber. Well, didn't save me early enough, but she saved me eventually, because I didn't know what to do. Fiona, you have something to say.
As we were all, you know, as I listened to all of you talk about how this felt like a family, I feel overwhelmed to see the top row of my screen right now is my mom and dad, Melinda, Andy, Will, Anna, and then my brother is kind of lower, and next to Miles is Quinn. And it's like, this was my household growing up. This was like everyone who cared for me, everyone who was around our dinner table every single night as they edited downstairs in the room that was later Miles's bedroom. And I think for both Miles and I, you know, I've always felt like we were born into this project. This wasn't like something that ever existed on the periphery of our lives. This was really like the foundation of who we are as a family. And that includes the 4 nuclear family of all of us. And then it also includes, like my mom said, all the various aunties and uncles and other family figures that help these projects grow. And then, as you know, the voice of this younger generation, I think I speak for both Miles and I when I say that it's these are the building blocks that really created us, and the lessons that I hear you all talking about coming through the filmmaking, as like, Will, the perspective that you take even on a day hike in your own neighborhood are also things that I felt really infused in the teachings that were running through our household growing up, which is one perk of having the, you know, the house and the office be the same space, which is not always the best, but you know, given the
you were born
context,
into a movement, Fiona.
we were happy to share the space and the time and the energy and all that. And, you know, being older now and being able to see it for what it is, I feel really lucky that that is the world that I come from and that I'm lucky to still be a part of. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, because
thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful.
a long time. So.
And
Thanks,
I
Fiona.
could I add one thing, just as some of the decidedly younger folks on this call, I show these films to my friends, and the conversations that come out of these films are very unlike other conversations I have. And I wanted to thank you all for making that possible. And obviously, I just have enormous gratitude to everyone who appeared in the films, and just the way that the whole project has played out over so many years to foster those conversations across many different groups of people I've been a part of in my life. So
Thanks, Miles.
Right. Just one last little funny anecdote is I've had two kind of scholarly moments of like feeling like the Sacred Land Film Project really intervened in my academic life. One was when I was in 4th grade and I entered my 4th grade classroom, I think with my mom before school started that day. And we opened the history textbook to a random page, and it was a quote by Vine Deloria. And it was this moment. I was like, whoa, this is like,
I knew that guy.
I know him. Like, and that the same thing happened my sophomore year of college. I was the only sophomore in a senior seminar that I somehow stuck my way into, and it was called Indigenous Politics. The professor later became my thesis advisor at Kehaulani County, and I opened one of our main texts for the class, and one of the first pieces was an essay by Melinda, and it just, in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm in the right place. This is where I'm supposed to be.
I am triggering, a flood of memories listening to you and remembering how, Melinda, you probably remember this, Miles's first job when he was a small child, he would clean out the cars of all the people who worked on the Sacred Land Film Project. If they were parked in front of the house while you were working, he'd go out there and vacuum and clean it up. His first job.
I wish I had that now.
And also, I just have such fond memories of when those two kids came with Toby and me to the Telluride Film Festival with Vine Deloria, and how we sat at lunch and Vine was asking Miles how old he was, and Miles said, I'm 7. And he said, huh, you should have killed your first buffalo by now. And, and just being able to watch Miles's face as he realized, oh my God, there's something I didn't realize I am supposed to be working towards, this goal. I mean, he was a goal-oriented young person. And, I just have seen so many experiences like that, Miles and Fiona, that have affected you in your lives. And certainly being able to be around all these beautiful people has really provided us with so much great storytelling and so many wonderful memories. And that's the newest Sacred Land Film Project intern trying to hide in the corner there, Addie. So welcome aboard.
Listen, I just want to thank everybody, Will, Andy, Jessica, and Melinda. Do you have a last thought to take us out here?
Just thank you, and Miles, thank you for all the tractor pictures, and Fiona, when I would sing to you and you would quiet down for a second, that was really a highlight of my day, every day. I think, you guys, if in case some of the folks here have not worked on films before, this is a team that doesn't work like other teams. As other people have indicated, the collaboration that we saw here was really profound, but also the impact that we were all determined to make. This is not a group of people that are interested in telling a story and then moving on to the next story. And so the deep investment in community gives back to each of us as individuals to, enable us to do things, as Jessica said and Fiona said, many, many years later. So I'm grateful for the moments that I had with all of you.
Well, thank you.
The years, yeah.
Truly a family affair. And we consider everybody listening part of the family. So really to all you who contributed, Amy, Leroy, Quinn, Vicente, Miles and Fiona, You're probably in therapy, over some of the things that we went through, workaholic parents, but I hope it was worth it. So listen, thank you all for joining us. It's been a great conversation, and we'll see you out there on the trail somewhere. So thanks very much. All right.
Thank you,
take care.
Toby.
Great. Thanks for putting it together and inviting us.
Been great. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Love you all.
Thanks.